El expresidente Barack Obama ha regresado y ha roto por completo su silencio. Esto lo hizo en un increíble discurso sorpresa que tiene completamente loco a Donald Trump. Discurso en el que habla sobre cómo Donald Trump ha atacado directamente el derecho al voto. El expresidente Barack Obama dio un discurso a un grupo compuesto por legisladores demócratas, los cuales están completamente a favor de Barack Obama. Y habló de cómo Estados Unidos por un tiempo fue la envidia del mundo en cuanto a derecho al voto se refería, y cómo funcionaban los regímenes autoritarios, las dictaduras alrededor del mundo, cómo manipulaban las elecciones. Barack Obama hablaba de cómo el resto del mundo envidiaba de cómo funcionaban las elecciones dentro de Estados Unidos y de cómo Estados Unidos sí hacía valer su democracia, hasta que llegó Donald Trump y la destruyó por completo. Escuchemos al expresidente Barack Obama. Miren el clip, por favor.
You got countries all around the world where the elections are fixed. And whoever's in charge suppresses and makes it hard for the opposition to compete. And we used to be a shining example to those countries. And people would aspire to the kind of true democracy that America has. And we need to get back to that. Because that's not just a Democratic or a Republican idea, that's an American idea. That's what we're fighting for.
Además, el expresidente Barack Obama habló de lo importante que es ahora defender el derecho al voto, ya que los republicanos se están dando cuenta de que realmente sus ideas no les gustan a nadie y están fracasando por completo. Así que como a los estadounidenses no les gustan sus ideas, los republicanos no tienen de otra más que manipular las elecciones. Miren el clip, por favor.
The problem that we've been seeing, not just recently, but this goes back a while, is that the Republicans increasingly recognize their ideas won't sell.
Ahora déjame mostrarte una parte un poco más extensa del discurso que tuvo Barack Obama frente a estos legisladores que por si acaso son legisladores de Texas. Mira el clip, por favor.
But I am more grateful to you and the rest of the delegation for your sacrifice and what you've done. And it is important for you to understand that highlighting what is happening in Texas has galvanized and mobilized folks across the country. So I think in these kinds of battles, there's a tendency sometimes to be frustrated because the game's a little fixed in Texas. You know, legislative maps have been drawn in ways that entrench one party rather than creating an even playing field. And so sometimes there might have been a temptation to just kind of sit back and let it happen. And I think thanks to the leadership of people like you, the leadership of Leader Wu, all of the members who have taken this stand, we're slowly waking people up to the realities of what's happening right now. And let me just say a little bit about this, and then I'll turn it over to Attorney General Holder. Both he and I believe that the right way to do democracy is not to have the people who are already in office select who's going to vote for them, but have the people of America vote and select who's going to represent them.
That's right, yeah.
And it would be our preference that that was done in a non-biased way, that an independent commission or some sort of neutral approach was taken so that Democrats and Republicans compete fairly. The lines aren't drawn to advantage one party or another, and the people decide based on their ideas. The problem that we've been seeing, not just recently, but this goes back a while, is that the Republicans increasingly recognize their ideas won't sell. So we've got to fix the game a little bit. And by drawing maps that splinter Democratic voting blocks, by packing in Democrats into one district so that they don't have influence in other districts, all those things can have an impact of weakening the impact of Democratic votes and strengthening and increasing the influence of Republican voters. And that's not fair. That's not how democracy is supposed to work. The thing that we've also come to recognize, though, and I think Eric, who's been working on this redistricting issue for almost a decade now, has what we all recognize is we can't let a systematic assault on democracy just happen and stand by. And so because of your actions, because of your courage, what you've seen is California responding, other states looking at what they can do to offset this mid-decade gerrymandering that is highly irregular and is not what we should be doing to balance out the maps for this upcoming election. And my hope is that rather than have a race to the bottom where every district is predetermined based on how it's drawn, that over time, the American people, ideally with the help of the courts, realizes that there's a better way. And I think that will happen, but it requires civic education. It requires mobilization. It requires activation of the sort that you have just described and that you guys are representative of. You're setting an example for what all of us have to do. Because, and I'll close with this. I think there's been a tendency. I was born in 1961. And just looking at the room there, that means I might be the oldest person up in here, except for Eric Holder, who's he's really old, even though, he looks good. But when I think about 1961, the Voting Rights Act hadn't yet passed. Civil Rights Act hadn't yet passed. March on Washington happened when I was a baby, a toddler. And so because of the struggles and the fights, and because of the courts recognizing they had a role to play in strengthening rather than weakening democracy, our democracy got systematically stronger during my lifetime, and most of the lifetimes of most of the people who are in that conference room that you guys are sitting in. The problem is, I think there's a tendency to take it for granted. And I think we became a little bit complacent over the years. We assumed that things would continue to get better, that our democracy would become more inclusive, that it would become more fair, that we'd make it easier for people to vote rather than harder for people to vote, that the votes would be counted rather than suppressed. And what we forgot is that history doesn't always move in a straight line, and it's not always 2 steps forward and another 2 steps forward. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and a step back. And we're in a moment right now where not just gerrymandering, but efforts at voter suppression, efforts at questioning the results of elections, efforts at the executive branch unilaterally doing things that bypass Congress and the people's representatives, militarization of cities, politicization of our justice departments and our military. Those are trend lines that remind us that this precious democracy that we've got is not a given. It's not self-executing. It requires us to fight for it. It requires us to stand up for it. And so as tired as y'all may be a little and missing home and ready to get a change of clothes because you didn't pack enough and all that, I want all of you to be returning feeling invigorated and know that you have helped to lead what is going to be a long struggle. It's not going to be resolved right away. And it's going to require ultimately the American people understanding the stakes and realizing that we cannot take our freedoms and our democracy for granted. You've helped set the tone for that, and I'm grateful for it.
Aquí tienes la forma impecable en la que Barack Obama finaliza este discurso. Míralo, por favor.
And maybe one last thing I want to point out, because obviously we're talking to Democrats, but the stakes that are involved right now actually impact Republicans as well.
Yeah. Don't know yet.
You know, the Republican Party started as a party that was the party of Lincoln. Illinois Republicanism was about expanding and protecting the Union and democracy and perfecting it. And you know, when I got to Washington, when I was in the state legislature, like all of you, there were differences between Democrats and Republicans, but there was still the capacity to work together. And when I got to the Senate, there were Republicans who I disagreed with on certain issues, but there was an agreement on the rules and decorum and conduct, that there were some things that were bigger than party. And I think there are still a bunch of Republicans out there, voters, as well as some of your colleagues, some people in Washington, who would like to see a return to a sense of fairness and a sense of independence, where a Republican legislature, just like a Democratic legislator, could listen to their district and the people they represent and sometimes break with the White House and sometimes do things based on their conscience and not try to fix the rules or rig the rules in ways that just shove through the agenda of a narrow faction. And when we have fair voting rights and we have fair maps and we're fairly competing, that's good for everybody, not just one side. And that's what we should be aspiring to over the long term, is a situation in which there are rules that are fair for everybody, and then we compete, just like a basketball game. We started off talking about George Gervin. We wouldn't want to be in a game where if one team gets down, suddenly they get to change the rules.
That's right.
Suddenly their baskets count for 4 points and yours only count for 2. You won't want to be in a basketball game where the other team starts to lose and suddenly they want to fire the ref and put in their own cousin to referee the game. And so the beauty of our democracy, just like any other system we build, is when we protect the integrity of the process. And that's what's at stake here, is the integrity of the process. And when you have a process that has integrity, when you have a democracy that has integrity, then sometimes you may lose an issue. Sometimes you may lose a vote. Sometimes the other side wins an election. And they do some things that you don't like, but you know, because it's fair, if you can persuade the people next time, then you can take the country in a better direction. That's what we need. That's what this country stands for. That's why it's been the envy of the world. You got countries all around the world where the elections are fixed, and whoever's in charge suppresses and makes it hard for the opposition to compete. And we used to be a shining example to those countries, and people would aspire to the kind of true democracy that America has. And we need to get back to that, because that's not just a Democratic or a Republican idea, that's an American idea. That's what we're fighting for. All right? I love y'all.
Palabras muy poderosas de parte del expresidente Barack Obama. Me encantaría que me digas tu opinión y de hecho también me encantaría que me digas qué tal te pareció la presidencia de Barack Obama, ya que hay muchas opiniones distintas. Puedes ser republicano o demócrata, puede que no apoyes a ninguno y te caiga mal Donald Trump o bien. ¿Qué opinas acerca del mandato de Barack Obama? Y aparte, ¿qué opinas de sus palabras? No pasa nada si tú no apoyas a Barack Obama pero te gustan las palabras o viceversa. La opinión de cada quien es importante, única y te pido por favor en los comentarios que seas respetuoso. Como siempre te digo, tu opinión para mí es lo más importante y quisiera que la pongas. Además, si conoces a alguien que le guste esta información o que le sirva, te agradecería que se lo compartas, no estaría de más. Está de más repetirlo, pero si te gusta el contenido de política estadounidense, te gusta estar informado con lo que realmente está pasando, te va a encantar suscribirte al canal, ya que subo videos todos los días. Mi nombre es José Alvarado, soy economista y estoy comprometido con informarte diariamente. Nos vemos en el siguiente video. Adiós.